In the video today, we're answering a viewer question because Remy asks us, they said on a documentary on Netflix I watched, the Battle of Gettysburg started as a fight over shoes. Is this true? Well, let's get into it. Marking the Confederacy's last stab at a major offensive in a northern state, the 3 brutal days of fighting in July of 1863 around the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, mark the bloodiest battle of the American Civil War. Situated at the junction of 10 roads at a time when most places were served by 1 or 2 and only about 30 miles from 2 key Union supply routes, it shouldn't be surprising that Union and Confederate troops ran into each other there. What is surprising, however, is that many historians believe the battle played out the way it did because of a strong Confederate desire for new shoes. Leading up to the battle on June 22, 1863, Confederate General Jubal Early had crossed the Potomac River at Shepherdstown. Moving on to Chambersburg on June 25th, Early received instructions from Lieutenant General Richard Ewell to move east through Gettysburg to York. There he was to cut off a major rail line between Harrisburg and Baltimore and then continue east to Wrightsville to destroy a significant bridge over the Susquehanna River that connected the region to Philadelphia. Early traveled with 15 empty supply wagons with the hope of refitting his division, and on June 26, 1863, his command reached Gettysburg where small numbers of Union troops were encamped. Sending a brigade under the command of Brigadier General John B. Gordon and a battalion of cavalry led by Colonel E.V. White to root out the enemy, which they did, Early himself entered the town on the same day. Although Early had hoped to resupply his division, Gettysburg authorities were insistent that they had few available supplies. Unimpressed, Early conducted a search but was only able to find a very small quantity of commissary supplies and about 2,000 rations. Early noted there were no apparent warehouses, and having a date to keep with a rail line and a bridge, he left town early the next day. Early reported that he had insufficient time to determine with certainty that there were no hidden supplies, but in his opinion, if there were any, they were limited. 2 days later, in the town of York, Early, still seeking supplies, was able to requisition demand from the town between 1,200 and 1,500 pairs of shoes, as well as socks, hats, rations, and more than $28,000. Early and his troops also successfully took control of the railroad at York, burned the Columbia Bridge at Wrightsville, and proceeded to destroy other depots and bridges in the area, although his continued pursuit for additional supplies bore little fruit. On June 29, 1863, Early was ordered by General Robert E. Lee, along with the rest of the Army of Northern Virginia, about 75,000 troops, to join forces around Gettysburg. Major General Harry Heth led one of those divisions and, like all of Lee's troops, was under specific orders to wait for the arrival of the full force before engaging in any fighting. Heth was among the first to arrive at Gettysburg on June 30, 1863. Perhaps because they were sorely in need of them, a rumor had been circulating among Lee's forces that there was a stockpile of shoes in the town, and shortly after arriving, Heth, in fact, ordered Brigadier General Johnson Pettigrew to search the town for army supplies, shoes specifically, and return the same day. Pettigrew then ran into Union troops, and despite Lee's orders, Heth ended up starting a small skirmish. The next day, June 1, 1863, Heth's division again met Union troops, including cavalry forces led by Union Brigadier General John Buford, and later reinforcements under the command of Union Major General John F. Reynolds. The fighting escalated into a large battle, with Heth's division suffering heavy casualties and Reynolds being killed. Rather than risk losing Heth's division, Lee was forced to send in support, which prevented him from carrying out his plan of uniting the entire army in a single large force before meeting the enemy. Subsequently, on that day, fighting occurred at Seminary Ridge, Oak Hill, McPherson's Ridge, and Barlow's Knoll. Early in the morning on June 2, 1863, Union Major General George Meade arrived with the remaining Union forces, more than 90,000 total, and things got really hairy. That day saw fighting at the Peach Orchard, the Wheatfield, Devil's Den, Trussell's Farm, Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, and Little Round Top. July 3, 1863 saw fighting at Culp's Hill and Cemetery Ridge, as well as the dramatic and devastating Pickett's Charge, composed of 3 Confederate divisions, one each commanded by Major General George Pickett, Brigadier General Pettigrew, and Major General Isaac R. Trimble, and all under the command of Lieutenant General James Longstreet. Ineffective and bloody, it is estimated that of the 12,000 or so Confederate troops who participated in the charge, approximately 1,100 were killed in battle, another 4,000 or so were wounded, and an additional additional 3,700 were captured by the Union. When later asked who was responsible for the resounding defeat, General Pickett is rumored to have replied, "I always thought the Yankees had something to do with it." When the fighting was over, more than 51,000 soldiers had been killed, wounded, captured, or were missing. While dedicating the site as a national cemetery, President Abraham Lincoln praised the fallen by noting that they gave their lives that their nation might live. Bonus fact. Speaking of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, when Lincoln was invited to the dedication ceremony of the Soldiers' National Cemetery, it was not as the primary speaker, but simply to follow famed orator and U.S. Senator Edward Everett. Everett first gave a well-received speech that lasted around 2 hours. Lincoln then got up and gave his now famous address, which was around 10 sentences. Interestingly, it's not clear today whether Lincoln's speech was well-received at the time he gave it. Lincoln himself seemed to think it was an utter failure. When he finished the speech, no one initially clapped or gave any sign that they had liked it. After a short period, a few people began to clap, but most remained silent. Reports from people at the speech were very mixed, but they tended to fall into two camps. Some thought the complete silence after the speech was out of respect and awe of the president and his speech. Others thought that the silence and even the subsequent small amounts of applause were in contempt for the short, lackluster speech the president had chosen to give on such an important occasion. These mixed reviews continued in the newspapers the following days, with reports generally following two lines, depending on what party the reporting body belonged to. The Chicago Times, for instance, reported that the cheek of every American must tingle with shame as he reads the silly, flat, and dishwatery utterances of the man who has to be pointed out to intelligent foreigners as the President of the United States. Not surprisingly, the Chicago Times was a pro-Democrat newspaper. The pro-Republican New York Times, on the other hand, praised it as deep in feeling, compact in thought and expression, and tasteful and elegant in every word and comma. Another interesting tidbit about the Gettysburg Address is that today no one is actually sure of the precise wording of Lincoln's speech due to the fact that there are 5 primary manuscripts purporting to be the original text of the speech. These 5 manuscripts differ from one another slightly and even differ from the exact wording that many newspapers printed after the speech was given. You might then say, well, just use the one that Lincoln himself wrote, but in fact those 5 primary manuscripts were all written by Lincoln. The first 2 were written by Lincoln and given to his secretaries. The latter 3 manuscripts were written by Lincoln and given out to charities. The version of the speech that you'll most often read or hear is known as the Bliss version. Each of the versions is named after the person that Lincoln gave the document to. In this case, it's named after Colonel Alexander Bliss. The Bliss version is unlikely to be the exact wording of the speech due to the fact that it was written well after Lincoln gave the speech. However, it is the only version in which Lincoln put a title on, signed, and dated. It is also thought to be the last version he wrote, with Lincoln still tinkering with the wording even after the speech. Given it was the last, it's assumed this is the version that he was happiest with. Largely because of those reasons, it remains the most popular version, even though, in fact, either the Hay or Nicolay version, which are now stored in the Library of Congress, was more probably closer to the actual wording. We say closer because transcriptions taken of the speech, which usually are quite accurate, differ from the wording in both the Hay and Nicolay versions. So it's likely that Lincoln changed his wording slightly from what he wrote down while giving the speech. Nevertheless, the most popular version is the Bliss, which is the one inscribed on the Lincoln Memorial. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and do not forget to subscribe. We got brand new videos just like this every day of the week. For more from me, why not check out my other channel called Highlight History? I'm going to link to that below. And as always, thank you for watching.